Welcome to another episode of Chip One Media. I'm your host, Franco, and we give you industry updates, breakthroughs, and features. We talk to industry experts and thought leaders to get their insights on relevant subjects that affect everyone. Joining me today is Misha from TechTaiwan. Misha, thank you for the time. Appreciate you being on the show. How is everything there in Taiwan?
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you.
As the
Mhm.
current global chip shortage continues to hound industries, how does it
Mhm.
change Taiwan's semiconductor and contract manufacturing industry?
Yeah, and I think there are a few angles to look at it, and I think the most important one on a global scale is the geopolitical aspect of the issue. Because during the crisis, the world, especially the United States and Europe, they realized that the semiconductor manufacturing capacities and capabilities have been overly concentrated in East Asia, and especially Taiwan's TSMC and South Korea's Samsung, they have been having a really outsized role in the global semiconductor industry. So, partly as a reaction to the chip shortage crisis, and also the growing importance of China's semiconductor industry. And so countries like United States and European Union, they have been trying to attract TSMC and other Taiwanese contract manufacturers to set up production locations in the US or in Europe. So now we are seeing the TSMC, they are planning to ban their foundry in the US, and now they have also recently made the decision to create another foundry in Japan. And now, according to TSMC, they are also thinking about making up another new foundry in Europe. And according to my latest knowledge, the TSMC is already surveying like the site, the environment, Germany. And so that's the geopolitical aspect of it. And for the semiconductor industry, I think one of the reaction to this crisis is that they have been, because previously the entire semiconductor industry, especially TSMC and Samsung, they have been pursuing the so-called, so they have been trying to produce more advanced manufacturing nodes. And during this chip shortage crisis, mature manufacturing such as the 28 nanometer, it has occupied a central role in this shortage crisis. So as a response, we see TSMC and UNC, they are like expanding the manufacturing capacity for mature nodes, and we are seeing, especially they are focusing on the 28 nanometer. In the case of TSMC, like it's building 28 nanometer node in Japan, in China, and I think in the forthcoming future we will see continuous expansion in this specific. And in terms of electronics contract manufacturers, like the auto industry, it has been severely impacted by the shortage. Traditional car manufacturers such as Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz, they have realized that previously they didn't pay enough attention to semiconductor. But now with the rise of electric vehicles, now they realize that this is a section that they have been missing out. At the same time, a lot of Taiwanese contract manufacturers, previously they were making servers, phones like iPhones, and now they realize that the growing importance of EV and especially the role of computers in EVs, that gives them an opportunity to hit into the global EV supply
Well,
chain.
but let me cut you off there. Let's circle
Yeah.
back for a bit, my friend. When it comes to the entire spectrum of the global chip shortage, I mean, for context, for the people who are going to watch and listen to this, in your study, in your research, how did this entire chip shortage crisis come about? Based on the people that we've talked to, COVID was just one of those things
COVID
that
is just like one of
exposed
the
it.
things that trigger the whole thing. I think based on my research, it can be traced back to the US-China trade war because the US has put Huawei, like the telecom Huawei, under sanctions. In response to the sanction, Huawei was not able to acquire the chips that it used to be able to obtain. So in response, not only Huawei, but also other Chinese ICT companies, they are worried that they could be the next target of US sanctions. So they start accumulating the chips, order the amount of chips that they don't really need in this year. They start kind of stockpiling. And so the stockpiling issue from the Chinese side, it kind of contributes to the issue. Then the pandemic also accelerated this process. And when it comes to the automotive sector, and during the pandemic, the demand for the cars was declining. So the auto industry came to the conclusion that they didn't really need to produce cars. So they shut off. But then like the things come down a bit. Then the auto industry decided that, okay, now it's time to put a factory back into operation. But when they were shutting factories and all the capacity previously preserved for them went to the household, even like PCs, because during the pandemic there was a huge demand for PCs and all the other equipments for like remote learning, remote
Yeah,
working.
everyone's working from home, so everyone ordered
And,
more cell phones,
and
more tablets, more laptops.
exactly. And so all the capacities previously reserved for the auto sector, they went to this electronics instead. So the auto sector was facing this crisis when they realized that they could not find contract manufacturers to produce the chips for them. So it kind of also contributed to the whole crisis. And then, as you know, like in summer in Taiwan, we had like a drought, and the TSMC has been a heavy use of water. So the drought kind of impacted TSMC's manufacturing ability. And as far as I remember, in Japan, they also had a fire in one of their key semiconductor needs. So all of the reasons together, they kind of contribute to this whole issue we see.
Everything started opening again. Then you have to deal with local and international restrictions and regulations.
Yeah,
We go back to the automotive industry. So now
yeah,
there's a shortage, and then here comes big car manufacturers rolling out electric vehicles.
yeah,
So
that's right.
so
Yeah,
far, so far there's this test
yeah.
there's Tesla, Mercedes Benz,
Yeah,
Ford.
everyone is pouring into this industry. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're still rolling out. And I mean, this is probably the future of automotive industry. Now, when it comes to that, what is the role of Taiwan in the electric vehicle supply chain?
Well, previously, as I said, a lot of Taiwanese contract manufacturers, they manufacture smartphones for Apple, they manufacture servers for Amazon, but now they see growth in these sectors to be not growing as fast as previously, and so they see EVs as the next area of growth, and especially compared to traditional autos, EVs, they require a lot of like electronic products, semiconductors, and so Taiwanese contract manufacturers, they started to see EV as a potential for them to hit into global EV supply chains. And previously, like the auto sector supply chain has been dominated by, tier one, tier two companies like Continental, Bosch, and so on. In contrast, Taiwanese contract manufacturers, they have been complaining about having low profit margins. So they think that if they hit into the global EV supply chains and kind of become tier one or tier two suppliers, they can boost their profit margins. And so in response, hit into the semiconductor sector, because previously some of them, like Foxconn, they were not especially concentrated on semiconductor, but now starting from earlier this year, they have been pouring all their efforts into like acquiring fabs in Malaysia and in Taiwan, and through all kinds of acquisitions and cooperations, like companies like Foxconn, they have been trying to boost their capabilities not only in terms of chip manufacturing and also in terms of design. And at the same time, we see other Taiwanese companies hitting into Tesla supply chains. Like it used to be, I think it still factories like Apple products, but now since it has hit into Tesla's supply chain, and Tesla is moving to Texas
Yeah,
and
the gigafactories.
yeah, and so we see companies like Pectron. It has also followed Tesla into they are thinking about creating a new manufacturing line in the US. So in the long term, I think because of all these dynamics from like supply chains resilience and also the geopolitical issues, more and more Taiwanese manufacturers, they will also put some of their production capacities in the US and probably in Europe.
I have a curious question. Let me
Yeah,
sneak this in.
yeah,
Um,
okay. Sure.
this has been a topic of
Yeah.
capacity allocation, management of natural resources. Where do we put which into what type of production? And then
Mhm.
everyone's talking about expansion. TSMC is trying to reach out to possible locations. How long does it take to develop a fab? For everyone who has no idea how semiconductors are done or created, like
Uh,
how long do these things take to develop?
it usually take 2 or 3 years, like as far as
Wow.
yeah, and
So like
so
research, build, test, 2 to 3
like
years.
surveying the environment and getting all the workforce together and build up the actual facility, then start like producing. Like the whole process take, I think for TSMC's case, as far as I remember, it usually takes 3 years. Yeah.
Wow. So if they say that they're
Talking
expanding to several
about
regions,
building it from scratch, and sometimes like for Foxconn, they would acquire production plants that had like more outdated equipment, and they would acquire it and try to update the equipment, and it will take probably shorter than 3 years. Yeah.
so now when they say that they're going to expand to other regions, so it's the possibility of
Yeah.
taking it there. So nothing's final. They have to survey it. They have to check
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
place. Okay.
Yeah,
So
especially in in Europe and Japan, where TSMC had no manufacturing presence before. So now, so in those cases, they really have to start from scratch. And in the process, you really have to look at like the quality of the workforce and the environment. You have to make sure that the utilities have been stable. There's a ample supply of water, and in the case of TSMC, because putting up a foundry is a really expensive process. And in the case of Japan and probably in Europe, you will have to make sure that there will be customers in the country where you set up production, and have to make sure that there will be subsidies from the government. So you really need to put in a lot of factors to consider if this location is suitable to put up a site.
since this is a battle of real estate, and then everyone's trying to be everywhere. So we got automotive, we got your gadgets,
Yeah,
we got your smart cities, your smart homes. Okay, so
yeah,
everything's getting digitized. I want to discuss like everyone wants to go to space as well. All right,
yeah,
so we got Richard Branson flying,
yeah,
floating in the air in his videos, and then Jeff Bezos of Amazon wants to go to
yeah,
space. Then the success, I think this is mainly because of the success of SpaceX, and then
yes.
And then
link.
Taiwan, yeah, then Taiwan has its own. So Taiwan's developing their own space program. So
Yeah.
with the success of Starlinks, it has become a race for the stars. Okay, it has become a race to the stars. How do you see Taiwan's role in the satellite supply chain?
First of all, I think Taiwan has made it a national priority to hit into the space. In the end, of course, it's trying to develop its own space launching rocket launching capability and to shoot up its own satellites, especially rocket launching capability and satellites that also have like a security dimension of it. And meanwhile, a lot of Taiwanese manufacturers like Pactron, for example, as I mentioned before, they used to manufacture servers, phones, but now the growth in the area has been stagnating, and they realize that low Earth orbit satellite can be a new chance of growth. So that's kind of like the same mentality when they try to hit into the global EV supply chain. And in this case of satellite, Taiwan semiconductor industry has a special advantage because Taiwan already has a quite top tier semiconductor industry. So if you want to hit into, so in for Starlinks, it already has quite a few Taiwanese suppliers. But for now, most of the Taiwanese suppliers, they provide the ground equipment, and only a few of them are able to hit into the actual space, like making the way into a satellite. But still, we get suppliers from Taiwan who provide the modular solar panels for the Starlink satellites. But in the long term, Taiwan semiconductor industry has a significant advantage because like the demand for high quality semiconductor from satellites can be really heavy. But now I think the primary challenge we have to address now is that we don't have a domestic rocket launch ability. So now whenever we try to shoot a satellite into space, we have to use Elon Musk rockets, or we have to, and we can't even find a local like launching site because we have a lot of territorial disputes. So now the government has been playing a large role in the process to secure the launching site. Also, and since we don't have a domestic launch capability, that means that a lot of equipment, because for space equipment, you have to make sure that it can really survive the really harsh environment in space. For example, we have like radiation, really extreme temperature, and you have to make sure that the ground equipment you have can really tolerate that kind of environment. But without our own launching capability, you never really know how these things you produced and design can really operate and function well in space. So that's why our National Space Center has been trying to provide equipment where you can taste your own products on the Earth, and you don't have to go to space to realize that probably some of the components you make are not operating well. So that's the current condition of our of Taiwanese company.
Final question before I let you go, my friend. With all of these things happening, TSMC wanting to branch out, other fab factories, other semiconductor manufacturing companies are also increasing their capacity.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, and then if you look on the other side of the spectrum, there are companies like Tesla that want to produce everything in-house. The way you see things pan out, how will all of this play together?
Yeah, I think Tesla, they indeed produce a lot of things in house, but they only produce like the most crucial things in-house, but from like cost reduction perspectives, and especially when you are trying to serve the market in China and Asia and all over the world, in the long term, you still have to rely on supply chain. Like you can produce everything in-house given the complexity of like making an electric vehicles. Yeah. So in the long term and for non-core products, I think they still have to go to Taiwanese suppliers. Yeah. And
Okay, that is awesome, Misha. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for doing this.
okay.
I'm gonna go catch you once again. Please, where can people find you? Where can they see your work?
Thank you for joining the conversation. And if you are interested in the semiconductor industry and EV space industry in Taiwan, you can always visit TechTaiwan.com, and there you can learn about Taiwan's role in the global EV space, EV and semiconductor supply chains. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, bro.